Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we have a holiday horror triple feature with Black Christmas, and Black Christmas. We'll differentiate them when we get to the main section of the episode. But first, we want to remind everyone that Genre Vision is brought to you by our wonderful Patreon premium subscribers at patreon.com/genrevision. If you go to patreon.com/genrevision, you can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. You'll get access to all of our bonus content for all of the Genre Vision network of shows, including the Office Christmas Party that we just recorded with our Genre Vision sister, Danielle. We always love having Danielle on, and you might hear from her a little later in this episode. So if you want to get access to even more Genre Vision stuff, patreon.com/genrevision. Also, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. If you do leave a written review, we promise to feature it on the show. And last but not least, we do have a Q&A episode coming up in February, so go to genrevision.com, look for the Q&A post, which has a picture of the Riddler on it. Comment in the comment section for that post, and we'll take in the question that way, or you can click the email button on genrevision.com and send us your question privately. You can tweet it at us at GenreVisionPod. Whole bunch of ways you can send us the questions, but please, please, please send them in. We had a ton of questions for our last Q&A episode, so please send those in. We really love doing those, and we really love hearing from you all. Okay, we wanted to do a Black Christmas triple feature because there was a new film that's just come out from Blumhouse, and Black Christmas has been remade once before, and had of course, the original film in 1974, directed by Bob Clark, who would go on to make another seminal Christmas film, A Christmas Story. Black Christmas has always been a very interesting movie in the horror canon because it's often called the first slasher movie predating Halloween, one of the first kind of themed horror movies around Christmas, even though like the Christmas theming is just kind of setting in the original one. And we're going to, go chronologically here and start off with that one. It's not like about Christmas so much, but it's the Shane Black thinking where it's like Christmas is just a really great setting for a story. And I think I'll defer to you first, Travis, for your feelings on Black Christmas 74, because I think I have a slightly less popular take on the movie.
Well, this was my first watch of the original 1974 Black Christmas, and I was really surprised by it. I was actually surprised at how much I liked it. If anybody knows me, they know I'm not the biggest slasher guy. Like, it actually took me quite a long time to warm up to even Halloween, the John Carpenter classic, which Black Christmas predates. Black Christmas is a seminal slasher story that comes from the classic urban myth of the call is coming from inside the house. It's the babysitter, the man upstairs.
Which they made into another, I think, TV movie, Stranger.
Yeah, When a Stranger Calls. And which was also remade. But the sorority house setting and the Christmas backdrop are kind of what lend it new flavor in Black Christmas. What lends it its really unique style is Bob Clark and cinematography by a guy named Reginald Morris. The film has such a signature look that evokes the best of, not only sort of Christmas time imagery, but really does define a signature look for the film. And it makes such a kind of a standard location into a really interesting location. The sorority house does feel an incredibly tangible and real place. What makes that even better is the fact that they're populating it with characters that are kind of instantly identifiable in that they're differentiated well. They don't necessarily feel like lived in human characters. They're kind of archetypes, but they explore them in ways that make them a little bit more complex.
I don't think they fall into the same category as what we would come to typify in slasher movies, like a Friday the 13th ensemble.
They're not teen slasher bait.
Yeah, they've got more detail than that. And I will say one of my favorite things about Black Christmas 74 that you allude to with Bob Clark and the cinematography, the movie has mood. And mood is one of the greatest assets in its arsenal. And that's specifically when it is committing to the horror of it all, of following from the killer's perspective, the disturbing phone calls that the killer is making to the house. These are still, what are we, 45 years later, genuinely creepy.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the content of the calls alone is actually kind of boundary pushing even for today. Like, you really don't see a whole lot of mainstream films using the kind of language that this horrible, awful killer uses on the phone. You don't see that. You certainly don't see it in either remake. But the fact that the movie can sort of boil everything down to these essential elements and still have enough unique flavor kind of gives it that lasting impact that I was so impressed with. It was also fully embracing the idea of the slasher as a formless, shapeless individual who is a true boogeyman. It is kind of in the Michael Myers template, but with even less detail. And in some ways, I think that makes the killer in the original Black Christmas, who goes by the name of Billy, which is kind of an informal name. It's not, who knows whether this man is actually named Billy or not. It makes him even more mysterious and even more frightening. It's like, who was this person at all?
Well, like you said, that this is definitely the classic urban legend monster man, the maniac. I really like that the movie treats this character, who's, like you said, is informally kind of known as Billy, because that's just one of the names that he mentions during these phone calls. And I think he says Agnes, it's Billy, which, okay. But I love when the movie is doing that stuff. I think the reason the movie's had the longevity it has is because of those sections. Those sections are amazing. Unfortunately, I think the majority of Black Christmas is paced like a TV movie from 1974.
You're correct. The pacing is kind of languid, and I would have a bigger problem with that if I didn't find what else the movie was doing interesting on a at least on a surface level. Like, the fact that it gave us a solid protagonist with Jess, who's played by Olivia Hussey. And it's not like Olivia Hussey was just some scream queen. Olivia Hussey was...
She was in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet.
Precisely. This is a serious dramatic actress who took this role of this sort of central final girl, I guess you can call her, and actually treated it with the same dramatic weight that she would a Shakespeare story. Olivia Hussey, in every moment she's on screen, fully believes in how this character is going through the story. And you find that the actions that she takes, except for some of the things that she does in the third act, are like, yeah, I get why this character is doing this. And the central drama, when it's not talking about these sorority girls getting killed in this sorority house, is about Jess's relationship with her unstable artist boyfriend, who's played by none other than Dave Bowman himself, Keir Dullea, Canadian sweetheart, but not before he was a really intense and kind of toxic experimental piano composer. Like, that's the character he plays in this movie, and it's such an interesting choice that is, I think, brilliantly reflected in the score, which is primarily done on piano, but like on I guess what would be called prepared piano. It's not like traditional, playing on keys. It's like the strumming of piano strings and hammering on piano strings with mallets. It's really cool.
Well, and I think we'll circle around to this when we get to Black Christmas 2019. I like that the movie has something on its mind. It is not just let's harass and murder these sorority girls for cheap horror kicks. There is a discussion about male-female relationships and how they're evolving, and a huge...
Oh, I think Dani has something to say about this. Hold on.
There's a whole abortion subplot, dude.
There it is.
It's very important to understand the context of this. This came out, I think, the year after Roe v. Wade passed, so it was possibly being written very soon after that decision. So to have that be a prominent part of this story is really effective.
Sure, but you're talking about something that happened in the United States. Black Christmas is not this is not an American film. This is a Canadian film. As a matter of fact, it's one of the few films that came about as the sort of launch of the Canadian film industry that began distributing internationally. Black Christmas is a distinctly Canadian film. As a matter of fact, it was only called Black Christmas in its native Canada. When it was released in the US, it was released under a couple of different titles. I think when they played it on TV in the US, they tried calling it Stranger in the House. And then upon its, I think its original release, it was Silent Night, Evil Night. But yeah, it's Black Christmas, and both remakes have come to be called Black Christmas, and it became a cult classic under the title Black Christmas. But as a Canadian film, they were able to do things like get Keir Dullea in there, and it's provided a slightly different flavor.
Not just that, we got Margot Kidder.
Oh God, yeah.
Who is really good in the movie because at first she's playing the archetype of she's the drunk. She's the, very boundary pushing and kind of socially, not socially awkward in the way that we would say it, but she's very kind of socially out there, and she kind of does stuff that would, a lot of people turn their noses up at. But as her character progresses, she becomes kind of sadder as the movie goes on, and that's good writing and a great performance from Kidder.
Well, it's not like the character gets sadder. It's like it actually reveals more things about her character that make us sad. It's like, oh, this person is actually a human being with a problem.
Not just slasher fodder.
And it's in that way that it kind of feels like a TV drama, and that it's, maybe these things are a little soap opera-esque, but I don't mind that because it's considerably more complex for a slasher, particularly a woman in a slasher film written and directed by men. That's a level of complexity that we don't frequently see in slasher films that were made in the 80s.
And there's other great stuff like the Den mother, Mrs. Mack, is a good source of comedy.
My God, she's funny.
Yeah, well, her just running gag of continually finding hidden bottles of booze that she's stashed everywhere is really fun. When she's taking one of the parents of the girls who have disappeared, who we know have been murdered, and she's walking him around the sorority, and there's, posters of naked women on the wall that she's trying to cover up. It is fun, but again, the pacing, I think, suffers from this. But we do have to talk about probably the image that is associated with Black Christmas, which is a woman sitting in a rocking chair with a plastic bag over her face after being strangled.
That's the poster. It really is a sensational and horrifying image that has persisted throughout all of the Black Christmas films. Because this is a movie about violence against women, the film has to take, a certain responsibility with that idea. The film's attacks are particularly scary. They do have a realism to them, and the fact that we don't really understand who this man is that's orchestrating and doing all this kind of stuff, and the fact that he could just be practically squatting in that house with all these young women is exceptionally horrifying.
Well, I think for the majority of the movie, he's hiding in the attic.
Yeah.
That's such a great, creepy idea. Unlike Michael Myers, Billy, the killer, is incredibly vocal, and his vocalizations, not just on the phone, but when he's killing or when he's stalking, are so terrifying.
There's a scene where he's in the attic and he has this total freak out. It's a POV scene, so it's shot from his point of view, but he has this total freak out and he's gibbering. The scariest scene in the film, hands down for me, is when Jess is running from him in the third act and he's trying to break down a door to get to her. And on the other side of the door, you hear this utter maniac, lunatic, gibbering, screaming, crying, is it pain? Is it sadness? Is it anger? What is it? You just know that there's this fucking human tornado on the other side of the door. And I found myself legitimately scared because if Billy broke down the door in that moment, I would have no idea what was on the other side. It's really scary.
Well, that's part of it, is that they keep him hidden. We never get a good look at him. The best look that we get is a very iconic shot of his eye looking through a door or something, which is great.
It's just a man shape.
It's the shape.
And this is before Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. This really is the shape, but I think thematically it is more about the fear of men dominating and controlling women.
Men not listening to women.
And not listening to women, yes. And, even to a point where the movie wants you to think, is it possible that Jess's boyfriend, Keir Dullea, is the killer? But yeah, Black Christmas is good. I just think so much of the movie feels like padding. There's so many subplots in the movie that really aren't purposeful to the main story that's going on. Like there's a kid that gets discovered murdered or dead in a park.
Right, but it's not something that's ever really shown to us or really feels important to what's going on centrally in the film. And you say there's a lot of plot. Really, there's hardly any. It's just there are several subplots that are sort of happening alongside this main plot of there are sorority girls in this house, it is Christmas time, and a man is slowly murdering them one by one.
Yeah, and everything does kind of center around that, but the way that it kind of fleshes itself out, I think, is both good and bad. And like, for example, there's like one specific police officer, Sergeant Nash, played by Doug McGrath, who's not listening to these women, who's kind of a bumbling idiot. He does, they play a prank on him where they tell him the number connection to their house is fellatio something, and he doesn't know what it means.
This is a very old joke.
Yeah,
I had to look it up. I was like, what exactly are they talking about here?
Really? Oh, yeah. I mean,
no, I knew what fellatio meant, but like the phone number prefixes and that kind of stuff, I wondered, was like, is that a Canadian thing?
Right. So there's, an extended sequence of the other cops laughing at this and taking him to task. And it is funny, but it also feels like this is just kind of a scene. Like, it's like,
right. The movie does feel like it spins its wheels. Like the second murder doesn't happen until over 40 minutes into the movie. It's like, okay, there's some fluff. And that really is the biggest detriment to what Black Christmas has going on, is it can't take its central plot and really sustain a full-length movie out of it.
But the good thing is that its third act commits wholly to its horror, and it does that stuff so effectively. Keir Dullea is killed, and the police think that he is the killer, so Billy or whoever it was gets away. The first victim is left in the attic, and we see her in that rocking chair in the window. A beautifully haunting image.
Yeah, and then we, figure out that like Jess is left in her bed alone while the killer is still inside the house, and then the movie just ends on this wide shot of the house as if to say, okay.
Yeah, that's it. It's incredibly ominous. I really think that the majority of Black Christmas being fondly remembered is because of this third act, and when it's focusing on the stuff with the killer, because all of that stuff is gangbusters.
Yeah, it's legitimately frightening, and I think was one of the movies that went on to define the prototype of the slasher, but is doing it in a way that I think people deserve to see more of. I mean, this is something that people should give a bit more credit to. The fact that this is able to do all these things so well and with such a surprisingly progressive approach to the genre is what makes Black Christmas, I think, still relevant today, and I think ripe for remake. Like, there's enough information there and enough potential there that this could be relevant really at any time, and I think that's one of the reasons it got remade for a 2006 release.
And I think it's why it's persisted. And in 2006, we got a remake from Glenn Morgan, who also worked with James Wong, and we did an episode with Dani on Glenn Morgan's other directorial effort, Willard. And Willard was a disappointment for them. It didn't do well. It wasn't critically well received. I hope that movie has gone on to earn the cult following it deserves. But the 2006 remake was widely derided.
Yep.
It was also horribly finagled with during the production and in post-production by the people who own Dimension Films, who I'm sure you know who we're talking about. And it was also released on Christmas Day, which is terrible.
If you're not a prestige film, that's a bad time to be releasing at the movie theaters.
On the day of Christmas, yes.
Yes. So Black Christmas 2006, is a Glenn Morgan, James Wong joint. They're coming off the success of things like Final Destination and a hot run on X-Files. Like, some of their X-Files episodes are utterly fantastic and some of the best in the run.
But that had been they had left X-Files much earlier.
Sure.
But they had that notoriety. And Black Xmas,
as it's kind of known.
Yeah, I mean, that was in the marketing. It was sold as Black Xmas. And then, of course, when they re-released the 74 version, all the DVDs called it Black Xmas. Black Christmas 06 is kind of a more strangely modern slasher movie, in that it's clearly interested with building up the lore behind its killer, or spoiler alert, killers. And it's also interested in gore. Like, it is a gore movie. Not to the point of something like you would think like a Hatchet or something like that, but it has now gotten to the point where what its predecessor inspired, it now has to kind of follow the rules of.
Sure. I mean, this is from the people who brought you Final Destination, so gore is a thing, inventive kills are a thing, and the bar has been raised in slasher cinema in the years since. So I think Black Christmas 2006 certainly felt a pressure to be able to stand up to modern slasher standards, at the time of release. But and I can't argue, like, the quality of the gore, from an effects standpoint is pretty cool, and there are some really nasty kills.
Well, and there's also, I think, because slasher movies, this is, way post Scream and everything, these movies have to be fun. The original Black Christmas, while it has some humor and stuff, it's not a fun movie.
Right.
Black Christmas '06 is trying to be a fun movie, while also it's trying to be, Fangoria cover fun. It's nasty, but it knows it and it's winking at you. So much so with a certain character. So, we have to now have a deep backstory to Billy, who is this jaundiced child of a loveless relationship and who is abused by his mother, has to grow up being hidden away in the attic.
If you're starting to think, hey, this kind of sounds a little bit like what Rob Zombie did to Michael Myers in his Halloween remake, you would be correct.
The only problem is that Rob Zombie wasn't having fun. Like, he's not a fun, director, except in maybe his original movie, House of 1,000 Corpses. Black Christmas, for all of this approach, is doing some really fun, goofball, stupid stuff, and it knows it.
Yeah, I mean, the movie certainly has a sense of humor, and I can appreciate that. I don't think I can recall a single time I laughed. I do like that they recast Andrea Martin, who's coming back from the original film. She now plays Mrs. Mack, and that's great.
And she's very fun in the role, and this is a more kind of typical remake for the time, where it's basically the same framework, but we're going to add one kind of big twist to the whole thing, and that is having Billy be this very descriptive character and be like a ridiculous slasher villain.
Right. The vibe that I kind of got from Black Christmas '06 was, they're looking at the original film and going, there's hardly any plot to the film. Let's add more plot. And let's have that plot explain who Billy actually is. And let's give him backstory. Part of the interesting thing about Billy is there is no backstory. Billy is a boogeyman, so I really see no value in giving him any kind of backstory, and certainly not the one that they give him in this film. Like, the backstory stuff in Black Christmas '06 I found baffling.
Well, here's the thing. If you look at it purely comparatively as a remake, I agree with you. Standing on its own, I think Billy in Black Christmas '06 is a fun, doofy slasher villain. And has a fun, doofy backstory a la a Jason Voorhees or someone. This is not the spectral boogeyman of the 1974 version. This is the guy they want to make Halloween masks out of. Mm-hmm. And that approach, I think, is treated with the kind of silliness that Glenn Morgan understands. And Glenn Morgan, what bums me out about watching Black Christmas '06 is that Glenn Morgan was a damn good director.
Yeah, the movie's got style and verve. It's got a snappy edit. It looks really good. The color palette's beautiful.
Yeah, the color timing and grading and everything on this looks so rich and vibrant and doesn't look like a lot of the stuff that we even get today. And I think he's got some great shot selections. I like the best thing about Billy's backstory is when he finally snaps and kills his mom and her abusive boyfriend and makes flesh gingerbread cookies out of them.
Oh yeah, that's a fun idea when you see like the cookie cutters punching holes in the skin, him like shoving it in the oven. It's like, yeah, this is silly fun.
Well, and the extreme close up on his mouth eating the flesh cookies. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, this is reveling in how gross and ridiculous it is. I don't like that. This is bad remake thinking where they're like, oh, the big, what's the thing that people know about Black Christmas? The woman who gets killed with the bag over her head. So that's like the modus operandi of the killers in this. Is
Sure.
just, we got to put bags over people's heads.
The film opens up with the Christmas song, The Man with the Bag. Everybody's waiting for the man with the bag. Christmas is in the bag.
That's where the cheekiness went over the line for me.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they pull this gag like 3 or 4 times in the movie is not great. I can't remember which time it is they do this, but they do a really killer eye gag with one of the bag deaths, and I'm just like, oh man, that is vicious and a very well executed effect that's like very painful. There are some other things in the film that I found a little less interesting. Like there's an icicle death in this movie.
It's basically an accidental death.
Yeah, Mrs. Mack dies from an accidental icicle through the head. It just kind of, it's like a CG gag. It's not great. But the primary issue I have with this film is that, just like in the original one, the dynamic between the sorority sisters is full of potential. But instead of trying to focus on that, the movie is trying to inject as much sort of plot and backstory as it can about Billy. And I cannot be bothered to care about any of that stuff. It's just kind of more like demented redneck stuff that I just don't have a whole lot of interest in. And that's my personal tastes, really, speaking about that. But the movie exists in the fallout from Scream, where the slasher movies had to be this kind of certain sexy comedy romp where they had to have this very specific tone, and
they had to have their tongue in their cheek.
Exactly. And the girls had to all be dressed a certain way, and it had to have a certain level of sex, and there had to be a certain level of like stupidity from the characters. Like they couldn't be too academic. That bled out of Scream onward, whereas Scream, approached this really smartly. Black Christmas doesn't take that kind of same self-awareness and do anything valuable with it.
My twofold issues with Black Christmas '06, I don't mind. I enjoy the Billy backstory, as over the top and grotesque as it is. The problem is the edit on this movie is awful.
Yeah, it sucks.
And I know that's all because of post-production finagling. And Billy's backstory, which is, at first presented as kind of the, let's sit by the fireplace and I'm going to tell you the story of Billy, whatever last name they gave him.
Lenz.
Yes, but the movie decides to cut that backstory up and place it throughout the movie. That's a bizarre decision.
Right. And then the stuff that they're putting in between that is stuff that I'm utterly baffled why they thought we would be interested in it at all. The relationship drama in this one is about like some asshole frat boy who filmed a sex tape with several of the sorority sisters. And it's like, does this matter at all? No.
Well, this is when I was talking about the twofold problem. The second problem is that, unlike in 74, where the sorority sisters, while they were still archetypical, they felt enough like real college-age women to me.
Sure, and they were at least individually identifiable. You'd be like, oh, it's that one.
Well, and that's, this one, and maybe this is a matter of casting or costume and makeup and writing, just a compilation of problems, is you have recognizable, noticeable actresses in this. Katie Cassidy, Michelle Trachtenberg, Lacey Chabert. Is Mary Elizabeth Winstead in this?
She is.
Yes. Yeah, I even forgot that she was in. Where it's like you're kind of cast like these are all actresses who probably would have auditioned for the same role in a movie.
Yeah, right. No, Lacey Chabert's character is the kind of more capable one. Like she knows how to, she knows where the breaker box is and stuff like that. Like she's that character.
This sorority sucks.
Yeah. Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character is the one with the Southern accent. There is one blonde nerdy girl who, for whatever reason, is like a brief red herring who shows up after a few flashbacks. And then you're like, the nerdy girl is creepy. And then it turns out she's just another sorority girl and she gets her head cut off.
Off screen, yeah.
Yeah, off screen. And then there's one who likes to drink. So that's an obvious nod to the Margot Kidder character. But who gives a shit in this movie? Honestly, it's not like they try to humanize her character. You feel any sympathy for her. It's just like
these are slasher fodder.
Yeah, the fodder aspect is like way too high.
And I can vibe with a movie when it's doing that if it can deliver on the more base pleasure fun of slasher movies. And I think Black Christmas does that par for the course. And that's the problem. It never exceeds the expectations of that kind of easy rule set. And again, the movie was so muddled with during its production and in post-production that, you know, they shot a whole nother ending that's supposed to be more ridiculous and violent, you know, ending with Billy impaled on top of a Christmas tree, which is a fun, gory slasher death idea, but then the movie can't wait to end. We've kind of implied this, but we haven't delved into it. In this one, they decide to have two killers, one of them being Agnes, who is Billy's daughter and sister. You can figure that out. Agnes is really bizarre in a way that I don't think ever quite works.
Yeah, Agnes is played by a man. And the man's name, let's see, is Dean Friss.
He just immediately made me think of the guy that played Vigo from Ghostbusters 2.
Anyway, I don't know what Dean Friss's age was at the time that they made Black Christmas, but when you see shots of Agnes as played by this big dude who looks kind of like Dee Snider meets Lou Ferrigno, you're like, why does Agnes look older than Billy, despite the fact that Agnes is Billy's daughter? Like, first off, why does Billy look like the weird liver eating guy from fucking X-Files?
Yeah, right. Well, I was going to say Agnes looks like a professional wrestler.
Yeah, Agnes kind of does. It's, you know, the build, the kind of hanging hair and stuff like that.
It's the steak face.
Today, this would be, I think, too transphobic to actually make it to the big screen. Like, I think this was sort of in the last time where it's like this was viewed as, quote, acceptable. Yeah, it's real weird. I don't understand the choice to cast Agnes with a male actor. I don't get it. I don't understand what it brings to the role. It's not frightening. It's just puzzling.
Well, and I one thing I have to mention, because, as I said, watching Black Christmas 06 makes me sad. This is the final film scored by Shirley Walker, who did the score for Willard.
And Final Destination.
Her Willard score is really good, but probably is best known as the series composer for Batman the Animated Series. So, you know, just personally is a big part of my childhood. She was actually brought on later to score the movie, and she ended up passing away before it was released. And the score is so bad. Yeah,
it's quite bad, and it's unfortunate in pretty much every way.
It's one of those scores that feels like it's not a part of the movie.
Yeah, it almost feels like a temp score.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like something that wasn't really quite finished, and that does make me sad. But really, the movie overall, just, you know, to quote Marie Kondo here, like, this did not spark joy. It has style, and I commend it for its style, and it has a certain attitude, and I think that attitude comes across, and I commend it for having at least sort of an attitude and what feels like a take. But I can't really say I liked it.
I can't say I like it because it makes me so sad. It put Glenn Morgan in director jail, which is so unfortunate because I think he really has something from what we've seen. You know, Shirley Walker passing away and this being the final stamp on her career also makes me sad. And it makes me sad that a base pleasure slasher movie couldn't get a birdie. It had to just settle for par. And it's like, man, if there were a couple more inventive gore gags, or if you stuck your tongue through your cheek, maybe that would make it something special. As it stands, Black Christmas 06, I don't think it's bad. It's just pretty disappointing. And especially because it's another one of those movies where, like, I see the potential. It's not like they didn't shoot it. Like, it's there in the movie, but it just wasn't put together well enough. And I also think maybe one of the bigger problems with Black Christmas 06 as a remake is that it doesn't really have anything deeply thematic going on, whereas Black Christmas 74 certainly did. And that is certainly an element, and maybe the most prominent element, of the 2019 version.
Yeah, I think with Black Christmas 2019, you and I and many others were quite excited at the announcement of a Black Christmas movie that would be written and directed by women whose perspectives are crucial in slasher films because they so often are the protagonists of these films and also the victims in these films. So I think having female perspective in a slasher film, and particularly in a property as important to slashers as Black Christmas is, like, I think that's a brilliant move. I was instantly excited when I heard who was going to be working on this. I'm a fan of April Wolf. I like her podcast, Switchblade Sisters. She's an excellent critic and a good writer. So when this was all announced as a complete surprise to me, I was pretty delighted because, you know, I knew that with Black Christmas 2006, it hadn't quite taken Black Christmas to that, you know, cultural saturation point where people were as aware of it. So I thought, hey, another bite at the apple is not bad. Like, this is a property that is definitely ready for another take. And I was really hoping that this could be like the next good take on this material.
Yeah, and I was very excited by the director, Sophia Takal. I actually haven't seen her work, but I'm aware of it and have seen pieces of it and was like, oh, this is a director who has a very definitive style. And I think between her, who she's also a co-writer on the script with April Wolf, I feel that there's going to be a vision behind this.
Sure. Her last feature film, Always Shine, had really good reviews and ended up on quite a few year-end lists in the year it came out. And I mean, I love the cast. It's Mackenzie Davis, who I'll watch in just about anything. So her being put onto this film, I think it sounded like a chocolate and peanut butter situation. It's like, okay, these are two flavors, you know, with her and April Wolf that I think will taste absolutely great together. So I had high hopes.
I'm going to come out the gate and say the best thing about Black Christmas 19 is Sophia Takal's direction and blocking and framing and her approach to making this movie that is clearly, I mean, you know, this is a Blumhouse deal and they are very effective at making cheap, quick horror movies. That's not a comment on their quality. That is just their business model. But between Takal's direction and the cinematography by Mark Schwartzbard, I think this movie looks fantastic.
Yeah, it looks incredible. And it doesn't really share the same look with the original or with the 2006 version. It has a totally different approach. Mm-hmm. It still uses a lot of saturated color, a lot of heavily saturated color, but is a little bit more grounded in realism. You know, whereas Black Christmas, it being a 1970s movies, I think that, you know, the lighting was a little bit more theatrical. You know, it was kind of like a stage play. And it's still very beautiful. And then Black Christmas 2006 was all about sort of like hyper neon stylized colors. Even Billy had to be his own special color in that film. But in Black Christmas 2019, it's dealing with a lot of deep shadow and then like colorful accents. It's really beautiful.
And, you know, we'll be a little more spoiler averse since this is a newer release, but we will get there. But I don't think this is a spoiler. The pre-credit sequence, which shows our first kill, is probably the best thing in the movie, where one of the sorority sisters is getting these threatening text messages because can't have creepy calls. Now they have to be text messages.
They are DMs. Somebody is trying to slide into her DMs.
On Yip Yap.
Well, which, let's be frank here, sliding into someone's DMs is kind of a gendered problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, we'll get to it. But I like this opening where she believes the messages are coming from this guy who's walking behind her. She puts her keys in her hands in a defensive measure, which I've done, and I know many women have felt the need to do to protect themselves.
My mom was the first person to tell me about that. She used to say that after she worked a shift at the hospital, she would put her keys in her fist to walk alone to her car in the parking garage. Mm-hmm. So the first I ever heard of that was from a woman. So to see that in this movie was like, okay, there's some female fear in this perspective. And I thought that was valuable.
Yeah. Well, and there is a mythos, a female mythos in you know, being afraid of men and everything, which again is part of the thematics of the first movie.
Yeah. It's all part of the text and subtext.
Mm-hmm. So this opening where she's stalked and eventually killed by a masked hooded figure, and the shot before the title comes up in which she is flailing on the ground creating a snow angel and then is dragged off, and it's kind of this slow bird's eye view that zooms out, that pulls away to see this path where her body's been dragged. I was like, wow, I like this. This has created a visual mission statement to me.
Yeah, it was a really nice way to lay out sort of a not only a thematic mission statement, but also a visual mission statement as well, to say like, okay, we're going to take this aesthetic choice and this Christmassy backdrop, and we're going to have some slasher fun with it. And, you know, the opening in that way is certainly promising, but how spoilery do we want to get to this? With this, rather?
I think let's be straight. The things we probably are going to spoil have been spoiled in the marketing. If you're listening this far, just know we're going to talk about this pretty blatantly.
So the big take on this film that differentiates it from prior Black Christmases is that in this one, the girls fight back. And if you just told me Black Christmas, but this time the girls fight back, I'm in. I'm sold. I think that's a really cool idea.
When you say the girls fight back, it's like, well, while that does happen in slasher movies, it's a tenet of the genre. This is a movie that's framing itself around that narrative, that it's a movie about fighting back. It's not that the girls just fight back, because they do that in slasher movies. This is a movie about women fighting back against men. It's very clear because this movie, much like another 2019 movie called The Fanatic, opens with a quote from one of its own fictional characters. And the opening quote is about men and men's ability to go out into the world and conquer it and be powerful, something to that effect.
Supernatural power.
Yes. So it's making its intentions known before we even see a frame of footage. It's like, okay, this is going to have an angle. The movie then proceeds to very, very, very directly make its feelings known about what it wants to say, which is a very incendiary...
listen to this white man struggle to describe this movie.
Well, yes, I have to tread carefully here.
Oh, man.
This is trying to be an incendiary, and I'm not saying offensive as in appalling. I'm saying it is taking the offense to the patriarchy, which is, of course, said in this movie. And we're going to talk about that in a second, because the reveal is that this is not a single killer stalking these women and murdering them for some nefarious purpose. This is a cult, literally the fraternity that was founded by the founder of the college, Hawthorne, whatever his name, Calvin Hawthorne.
So this is like Alpha Kappa something or other. It's the big frat on campus at Hawthorne College. So there is no one single killer. It is a cabal of hooded, masked frat boys that are participating in some sort of what initially appears to be like a hazing ritual to murder sorority girls. The truth about what eventually, comes to light is a little bit more complicated, but rest assured, the film is directly on a thematic level about women versus men as an institution, men with a capital M, men as monolith. The patriarchy, essentially. That's what the patriarchy is. It is the institution that is men.
Yes, and I think it's very important to differentiate. This is not the man as, an institution, as a nebulous kind of entity. This is men, capital M.
Versus women.
Yes, and we're going to have another Knives Out moment here where we have to state the message of the movie is not what I think you and I find problems with. It is the method of delivery.
Sure. But what is the message of the movie? Just in your estimation, what is the movie overall throughout the entire 90 whatever minutes of its running time trying to say?
I think it's a very basic college level screed against men as an institution, as literally as an institution. In this case, it's the college. That is a metaphor they're playing at, but this is not a movie that I think has a good grasp on metaphor.
I would agree. And I do agree that essentially the basic message of the movie is that men as an institution is outdated and should be broken down. what happens is the institution should be burned down. Like, that's the movie's ultimate message, is that the institution of men, the patriarchy, should burn. Again, this is not a message that I, vehemently disagree with at all. I think it is bold to be so direct in that messaging, but in execution, like you said, there really isn't a good grasp on metaphor. For me, and this is me personally in the way that I enjoy genre film affords storytellers this incredible opportunity to use metaphors in astounding ways. But when you actually remove all of the metaphor from a genre story and you make it directly about the text, it can't help but be a bit clumsy about its messaging. You and I have discussed this at length, and we've used adjectives like clumsy, inelegant, and you and I think, have come to an agreement that this is something you and I share in common. We don't like clumsy or inelegant or too blunt an approach to socio-political messaging in films.
Well, it's interesting because when I was having my screening and I was the only person there, I said...
I was one of three.
Yes. I said to you, I was like, I don't think bluntness is inherently bad, but when you combine it with a sense of earnestness, of earnest messaging, because I don't have a problem with a movie being blunt with its message. Like, that's not like, I told you when I was watching the movie, I was like, I'm thinking about Mad Max Fury Road. Like, a movie that is very clear about what it's saying and feeling.
Well, I mean, bluntness is relative. And you and I frequently talk about how movies have to, quote, play to the cheap seats. And, how they have to hammer home certain things in order that the audience will understand it. I think there have been great movies where the messaging to somebody like you or me is fairly apparent, but then you talk to... I hate to say the word layperson because you and I are laypersons in so many regards, but you talk to somebody who is maybe a little bit less experienced in parsing thematics of film, and they might not understand that The Last Jedi is actually about failure.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, how did you not get that?
But the thing is that when you mix bluntness with earnest, impassioned, and clearly kind of... I want to say agitprop approach.
For those who may not know, what is agitprop?
It is a piece of material that is purposely made to incite a reaction based on a certain socio-political standpoint.
Right. It's socio-political propaganda.
Yeah, it's agitating propaganda.
It was originally Soviet, communist propaganda, but it has kind of since come to mean strong socio-political propaganda. And yeah, this movie does feel like that. But what you also have to remember about Black Christmas is that it is a product from a corporation that is designed to make money. That is, the product is designed to sell tickets and get butts in seats and to help the corporation survive. And it makes me think, it's like, so this movie is a big sort of contemporary feminist screed. To what end? I certainly realize that there is a market for feminist mainstream films in genre cinema, and I think that's fantastic. Do I think this film fills that need? For me, it does not.
Well, there's also just so much about the movie that, regardless of its agitprop leanings, I just think it feels clunky. There's a lot of very clear ADR work going on.
Yeah, well, it's also clear to me that after test screenings, they had to do some fairly significant edits to the film.
Damage control.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Like, there was bad test screenings and they had to recut the film. They cut it down to a PG-13 from an R, although there are lots of different reasons why it was PG-13 upon release, but maybe an R in development and so on and so forth.
Well, regardless of that kind of pontificating, there's something apparent in the movie. For example, like, any moment of violence is very clearly masked somehow.
It's cut short.
There's a reveal of a dead body that completely wimps out on the reveal.
Which reveal are you talking about, at the risk of spoilers?
When she goes down, I think, into the basement and finds the girl, in the chair, and I think she's got a piece of glass in her face.
Yeah, the mirror face in the attic when she's going to look for the Christmas lights, which is actually a pretty well executed kill in terms of like staging her moving back and forth, rule of threes.
The buildup of that is great with this, black negative space in the back, and it's like, okay, I know something's in there.
It's playful in a way that I liked.
There's also a fun Exorcist 3 nod to what might be the greatest jump scare in all of horror cinema. But I think that's also telling, where it's like, oh, okay, when I realized it was what it was alluding to and making a reference to in Exorcist 3, I was like, oh, that was neat, but it didn't work.
Sure. Overall, problems I have with Black Christmas 2019 are actually something that it inherited from the original film. That's pacing issues. While I do feel that this film actually does some decent character work, particularly for its protagonist, played by Imogen Poots, who you might recognize from 28 Weeks Later and Green Room, this character named Riley. I feel like good character work is there.
I think the casting's really good.
Yeah, the casting's great. I like the film's attempt at building relationships between female characters. I feel like there is so much more good effort put towards that in this film than in either of the other two Black Christmas films. There are two characters, Riley and her, quote, little sister, this is a sorority, little sister, Helena. There are a couple scenes between them where you're like, yeah, the affection between these two is really genuine, and I really dig that. There is a certain point in the film where Riley and her sorority sister, Chris, have sort of a philosophical disagreement about what their how they express their feminism, what it has gotten them, and what their boldness and their brashness has gotten them. Because, like, make no mistake, Black Christmas 2019 is a rape revenge film.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely enough, it is a rape revenge film that is PG-13 and also seemingly directed and intended for younger female audiences.
Which, I'm happy to step back and say, this movie isn't made for me.
Mm-hmm.
The creators of it, I think, would say that about this. It's like, it's not made for me, and that's okay.
Sure.
And you made a really good point too about the movie, where men have to be okay with these kind of criticisms being lobbed at them in films and entertainment. And I think you said, it's like, this isn't like my feelings were hurt, or I feel like, no, this is poor representation or anything like that. It's just a matter of that the movie seems to just be a message, and that's it.
And it's not just one message too.
Well, true.
Like, I think so many of the problems that you and I had is it is trying to boil down so much about contemporary feminism.
Complicated stuff.
Yes, extraordinarily complicated topics and worth many, many hours of discussion. But to take so many aspects of contemporary feminism and so many talking points about contemporary feminism, and to boil each one down into a specific catchphrase, for lack of a better term. I understand that's reductive, but really this film is trying to pack in all of the contemporary feminist talking points that you might see on Twitter into the kind of hashtags that we see. Like, and these characters are using this as their vernacular in normal conversation. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, and I'm not saying that that's unrealistic, but in the context of the film, it's extraordinarily clunky, clumsy, inelegant. It's like we talked about with Knives Out. It's kind of like Twitter bleeding over into politics discussion. It's like, particularly for you and me, I understand this is about our particular taste. It's like, we find that painful to sit through.
Well, it's not so much, that I don't want to see those things reflected in my movies. Of course not. Like, film and art needs to somehow filter, whatever's going on, no matter how minuscule or immense in the world. In some way, art serves that function. But this particular delivery of it in Black Christmas 19, it feels like that was the only thing it had on its mind. And that's a shame, because the other things, like you said, like the casting or the relationship between the sisters and Riley as a character and other characters. There's so much potential there. And even where the movie goes, which is a supernatural element.
Yeah, totally new and foreign to this whole idea of Black Christmas. I mean, you and I have debated whether or not this is actually a Black Christmas movie. I say, it earns the moniker. I'm kind of not precious about that sort of stuff. It's about a sorority house at Christmas time being assaulted by male slashers. And while Billy was sort of this stand-in for the boogeyman, the frat, the alphas are the stand-in for, I mean, that's what they are. That's what they are. And it's also what they're called. They're the sort of stand-in for man as monolith. So for me, there's enough nods in this film to the original film that, yeah, it feels like a Black Christmas remake in the same way that, say, Snyder's Dawn of the Dead feels like a remake of Romero's Dawn of the Dead.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't disagree with that totally. I think that this version of Black Christmas is far enough removed that it could have removed itself even further and done something more original, and maybe not have had to rely so much on not only its moniker, but also 2x4 over your head messaging.
Well, the 2x4 over your head messaging is not at all related to what the movie is named.
No, but
or you using conventions of prior films. Like, I don't understand what that has to do with the messaging of the film in the least.
Well, it's not so much the messaging of the film. It's more about reception, where if this had not been called Black Christmas and it was still trying to do the messaging as bluntly as it is, I still don't think it would be as effective. But because now it has this perceived legacy, that's going to change the conversation around it already. I mean, we're doing it because we're doing it as a triple feature, comparing it to these other movies.
Sure, but when you talk about reception, it's like, but received by whom?
Well, the horror community, I think, definitely, and certainly just, like you said, I would be interested to hear what young women, what its target audience, how they feel about this.
Please, yeah.
But at the same time, I think that having that Black Christmas moniker, it honestly makes me feel the crassness of it all. The connections are thin enough that I think you could have divested yourself from that and not have had that kind of unnecessary weight on your shoulders as a Black Christmas movie.
I mean, I'm gonna fully disagree with you on this point. I don't think this is a problem at all. And really, the big overriding issue with this movie, and of course we've talked about the politics a lot, but when the movie makes itself almost entirely about the politics and the socio-political messaging, it's hard not to talk about as that is the central pillar of the film, the sort of defining aspect of this film. Because technically, in all technical aspects, it's like pretty damn good. And the section of the film where they kind of deal with the sort of plot mechanics directly of like, okay, there are bad people in the house. How do we deal with this? And it's like, those scenes work really, really well. Mm-hmm. And those like 15, 25 minutes of the movie where that's going on, it's like, shit, this is pretty good. But as soon as it's done with that kind of stuff and making more direct catchphrase messaging, is like, what are you doing, man?
Well, that kind of stuff feels like they're trying to set off people's Google alert for certain hashtags or something.
It's a screenplay. It's not SEO. And it feels...
That's good.
It feels really harsh to be judging the writing in this manner when I know Sophia Takal and April Wolf are incredibly intelligent and capable writers. But, and this is, of course, coming from a place of cynicism. So I apologize for that. But when the messaging is this direct and it pounds and hammers it this hard and this clumsily, you can't help but wonder, it's like, was this done cynically? Like, what executive decided, like, yeah, throw every single hashtag from the past 5 years on Twitter that relates at all to feminism in this movie and incorporate it directly into the dialogue with really no artful editing around it. It's just...
Well, it's so interesting because this coming from Blumhouse, I'm always going to think about Get Out. And Get Out is another movie where it's like the message can't be clearer. Everybody picked up on it. But that movie had an elegance or an artfulness in regards to its characters and its world and its story and its execution that if you wanted to, it would be very difficult. But I think if you wanted to, you can enjoy Get Out as just this kind of crazy Twilight Zone horror movie.
Well, there's this incredible moment in Get Out in the third act where you realize that no matter how direct the messaging has been about race relations, like there is this moment in the third act where Chris is strangling the villain of the film. In this moment we were going, yes, kill that bitch.
Yeah.
And then you see police lights, you see the cop car lights show up, and your heart just sinks in, and you're just like, oh no.
And there's also, you know, there's just, I'm not saying all movies have to have subtlety, but you have a moment in Get Out like Chris picking the cotton out of the chair to help free himself.
Sure.
Like, that is really good subtlety and subtext.
Well, I mean, picking cotton, lots of people picked up on that, but in a way that almost felt more clever. It felt more elegant. And I realized that it might be unsubtle and of course subtlety is relative, but it's using metaphor in a way that's actually pretty engaging. And because genre storytelling affords us that, you know, and for Black Christmas to kind of eschew metaphor at almost every turn, I think is a missed opportunity.
It's just unfortunate to do that in a genre format and have most of the movie feel like someone's just staring into the camera and yelling at you with a megaphone.
Like once the catchphrase comes out, it's like at a certain point it loses its meaning. We actually have to start talking about what they mean, you know, and really parsing the text of all of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an unfortunate note to end on, but you know, to wrap it all up in a bigger sense, I will say this about all three Black Christmas movies that I think is a total net positive and something I love about all of them. Each of these movies has a vision.
Yeah, each one is guided by a really strong vision. And while I think only one of these films is ultimately successful at executing that vision, the whole idea about Black Christmas is still ripe with potential. There's still so much on the table to be enjoyed. And if there's anything I wish people could take away from, you know, listening to this episode, it's like, see the original Black Christmas if you haven't seen it before. It really is a seminal slasher film and also a really serious take on the material. Like instead of being this slasher film that's aware that it's a slasher film, it's almost entirely blissfully unaware of those trappings.
I agree. I think all three films have their merits. I think all three films, the best thing that I can say about them is that they're all different, even though they all follow a similar framework. That's pretty great. I applaud that. Even for the ones that didn't work as well, I really applaud that none of them felt like carbon copies.
Agreed. Yeah, the variety here is refreshing and fun to talk about.
But I think it is time to head over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main feature. And we should say our shelf picks are going to be directly related for Black Christmas 2019, since it's the newer movie out. And we always want to encourage you, loyal listeners, to go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Black Christmas 2019?
This week, I am pulling off a movie called Body at Brighton Rock. This is from earlier this year. Writer and director is Roxanne Benjamin on this. So this is a woman, you know, female written, female directed film. And while it's not great, it is so direct in what its vision is and so earnest at what it wants to be. And the earnestness in this case actually works to its benefit. It is about a young woman who works as kind of a park ranger at a state park. And at one point she gets lost on a trail and is spending the night guarding what is basically a crime scene. And some things start to happen, like animal attacks, weird stalkers. And it's a really cool movie in concept. I found the execution to be a little bit lacking, but you know what? It's really low budget. That's okay. I think its ambitions and its earnestness are totally in the right place. If you're looking for an earnest, low budget output from female filmmakers that is endearing in all the right ways, I would recommend Body at Brighton Rock.
Well, I thought I'd go with another kind of culty movie about how women are taken advantage of, and certainly by what might be viewed as a patriarchal structure. And this is Starry Eyes. This is from Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer, who did the Pet Sematary remake earlier. While it's certainly more directly about the Hollywood system, I think there's, again, much like Black Christmas 2019, there's a very clear vision in this movie. And I think it's probably going to be maybe a little off-putting for dyed-in-the-wool horror fans, but it's just got such an attitude, and it's another movie where it's like the messaging couldn't be clearer, but it executes itself in a way that remains engaging even regardless of that. It's a movie I haven't revisited since it came out, and I think it's been out. It's like 5 years old now. So it's probably one I need to come back around to, but I was thinking about Starry Eyes during Black Christmas. And while it's certainly not tonally in that same wheelhouse, I think it has a lot of the same intentions that Black Christmas 2019 had, but it does it in a I hate to keep using this word again, but I think it does it in a more elegant manner.
I mean, it is about men and Hollywood as institutions. And it talks about Hollywood as an institution controlled by men. In the Me Too era, in the post-Harvey Weinstein era, it is certainly topical, but I think very well executed.
Well, and also, I believe it predated all that going down.
Yep.
So it felt, this is like a David Cronenberg Rabid or Shivers and the AIDS epidemic type thing, where it's like, oh, this is strangely
prescient.
Yeah. So but I highly recommend. I think the style and the direction is there. It was the reason when they got announced for Pet Sematary that I got really excited. So yeah, Starry Eyes, I highly recommend. But now we need to go to the listeners' shelf picks for last week's episode on 2010. And we got quite a few. Loyal listener JT, who it's good to hear from again, their recommendation was Before Sunset, which is part of the Before trilogy, which I must cop to never seeing any of these movies.
I've never seen them either. And I even thought about impulse buying the entire trilogy on Criterion Blu-ray. But one of these days, I'll watch them all. I like Linklater. I like most Linklater. Let me qualify that. I like most of what Linklater has to offer.
Yeah, but it was another sequel. JT said that it's way outside of genre fare, but it's a fantastic movie that takes the will they, won't they question of Before Sunrise and answers it while working on its own terms and creates new conflicts and is deeper on an emotional level. Maybe one of these days I'll get around to it. Loyal listener Pale Fire, their shelf pick was Aliens. Like 2001, the first Alien was a completely different beast than its sequel. The sequels were both more adventure-oriented than their mind-blowing forebears, while expanding on the universe the originals created. Can't argue with that.
Nope.
Mr. Milksteak's shelf pick says, while I was going to suggest another sequel made years after the original, I opted for Interstellar since it was the first one that came to mind for me, and I was happy to hear it mentioned in the episode. Yes, as we said in our 2010 episode, maybe one of the movies Interstellar owes the biggest debt to is 2010. And last but not least, loyal listener Eric Fuchs, who says, long time no comment, disloyal listener here. Don't worry, we love you, Eric. His shelf pick was Mission to Mars, another first contact with weird godlike alien race, and another more lucid follow-up to 2001. I'm going to be straight with you. I saw Mission to Mars when it hit video. I remember nothing about it.
I saw it, I think, on my 12th birthday, and I really didn't like it. And then I rewatched it a couple years ago, and I was like, yeah, there are a few things to like about this movie, but overall, I think pretty forgettable. It's certainly not good De Palma.
Well, it's famously the movie that De Palma decided, like, I'm done with Hollywood. Like, this is just too much. It's not how I want to make movies. So, but maybe, I mean, nobody talks about it except outside of the, this was a huge expensive flop and everything. So maybe, I don't know, maybe one day I'll have to get around to it. Let's do some Currently Consuming.
Num 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 num.
And joining us for this edition of Currently Consuming, we have Genre Vision's sister, Danielle Ryan. Thanks for coming on, Danielle.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk about all the things I've been binge watching.
Yeah, we just recorded our Genre Vision Office Christmas Party episode for Patreon. And Danielle was, of course, on there because she's part of the Genre Vision family. And we said, I should say Travis had the great idea of, hey, let's have Danny come on and do some Currently Consuming for this episode. So let's get things rolling. Danny, what's been on your plate?
So mostly 2 TV shows. One is on Amazon and one is on HBO Now. Both are super messed up. So the first is Fleabag. A little late to the party on this one. Heard about it when all the awards shows, were talking about how great it is. And it was winning an Emmys and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be apart from my husband for a month. What a great time to binge watch a show. And so I watched the whole thing in like 3 days. And Fleabag is absolutely brilliant. I love that we don't really ever learn the title character's name. She is simply Fleabag. There's quite a few characters. We never learn their names. These are just characters. It's very lived in. It's not that sort of we're going to explain this whole story to you kind of storytelling, despite it being super meta and Fleabag talking to the camera a lot. It's difficult. It's a show about a young woman who has sexual addiction and depression and some anxieties and things like that, and just sort of how she navigates life. And a big part of that is her talking to the camera, and we start kind of finding out why, and that's actually an element of the story. Like, it's that meta that her talking to the camera and being with us is actually recognized in the world occasionally. There's a whole sequence where somebody she's talking to goes, "Where did you go just now?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Just now, when you looked over there." And it was when she was talking to the camera. So very different kind of meta commentary, not sort of the cheeky Deadpool stuff, but something with a little bit more depth. And one of the things I love about it is just that not all of the characters are super lovable. They're all very complex, very human. The big standout is Olivia Colman as Fleabag's godmother. She is a wicked, wicked godmother. She's awful, but at the same time, there's these little moments where she's still really sympathetic. And I think that's fascinating. And I think that having a show about so many quote unquote unlikable women is really refreshing, and that Fleabag's really allowed to be her own character in a way that we don't see with female characters in most storytelling. It's refreshing. It's really painful at times. It's heartbreakingly funny, but it's great. I cannot recommend it heartily enough to pretty much anybody. And it's a quick watch, 30-minute episodes. I think there's 6 a piece. Like, it's like 12 episodes, so you're looking at like 6 hours, which is not really that much in today's binging world. And it has a definitive end. The ending of season 2 is the perfect ending, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge has said that's it. She doesn't want to do anymore. So very happy about that as well.
Yeah, it's been a buzz machine ever since it debuted, and it's gotten Phoebe Waller-Bridge a ton of work because she's been recognized, and I haven't seen, I don't think, a single second of the show. I just haven't gone there yet, primarily because I don't have a Prime account. But I don't think I've heard a single negative word about the show. The buzz has been consistently impressive, and one of these days I will knuckle up and watch it when I have, the time and money to reactivate my Prime account. But it's been on, I think, pretty much everybody's radar.
Yeah, it's very different from a lot of what else is out there, and it goes places that made me deeply uncomfortable, which is sort of, again, refreshing. Like, it's sort of like what Louis C.K.'s Louis show was trying to do if it was actually done by somebody with a whole bunch of empathy and a lot smarter and funnier, if I'm being honest. Like, it's so smart and funny, but like, Fleabag is a terrible person, and so many of these characters are awful, awful people. And so it's something that, while I do fully recommend it, I want you to understand it's not 100% a good time. But I think it's brilliant, and where it ends is really satisfying and really, really smart. And I think Fleabag is doing different things with storytelling that people are going to be teaching in college classes at some point. Sort of like, oh, this is a really unique way of telling a story. Let's talk about it. And again, just anything for the Olivia Colman scenes. She is just, if you thought she was good in The Favorite, she is on another level on Fleabag.
All right, Dani, do you have anything else for currently consuming this week?
I do. Speaking of terrible people, I also binge watched Succession, which is, again, late to the party. Season 2 just ended. Season 3 is coming out 2020 summer. Thank goodness, because I need it. This show is freakishly addictive. It's one part King Lear, one part Scorsese film, one part Greek tragedy. It's just totally bonkers. Brian Cox as the patriarch of the family is killing it. Every single freaking actor on it is killing it. I initially glommed on to Kieran Culkin because who wouldn't? But there are several other characters that wormed their way into my heart, and wormed is the right word because, again, they're all terrible, terrible people. But it's just fascinating stuff. Like it's Game of Thrones, but with CEOs. One thing I find fascinating about it is that a lot of the dialogue is actually improv. They let the actors do a lot of just messing around, coming up with things on set, and just the caliber of this cast, they're able to just come up with crazy, crazy stuff. And it's vulgar. It's mean. The comedy is very, very mean. I've described it as Arrested Development, but serious. And I stand by that. But it's great. It tickles my funny bone, and I actually care about these characters, even though they are just terrible human beings. Succession, if you're looking for some high stakes, ridiculous drama to fill your Game of Thrones void, it works.
All right, I'm going to go next, and I'll be rather brief. In the wake of Dr. Sleep, I, of course, read the novel. It is a novel that I read halfway when it came out and then completed it, and I wanted to brush up on some Mike Flanagan stuff. Like, I had seen Oculus, and I think I even reviewed it on a prior podcast called Hollywood Untapped that I did, and I wasn't all that keen on the movie, so I decided to rewatch Oculus. Oculus was Mike Flanagan's first movie that was backed by any kind of major money, and it's such a unique concept. It is, excuse me, a man sneezing really hard into his podcast microphone. No, it's about an antique mirror that kills people for reasons that remain totally opaque throughout the entirety of the film.
It's just cursed.
Well, I mean, it's like, well, then who cursed it? Doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, it's just an evil mirror.
Yeah, it's just an evil mirror, and it's about what happened when two siblings try to defeat this evil mirror. But it's also an interweaving of two distinct timelines, which is very Stephen King-y. It's very like it's very much like in the same intention of what Stephen King did with his novel It, in which the two stories are the same story and the scene transitions between them are seamless to the point of being a fever dream. Mm-hmm. I don't think anything has captured that sense any better than what Mike Flanagan did in both Oculus and in Haunting of Hill House.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like the seamless blending of two timelines back and forth works incredibly well. And I just wasn't giving Oculus its due back when it first arrived. It's so unlike anything else going on in mainstream horror. It was unlike anything else going on in mainstream horror when it first came out. And it's still unlike pretty much anything else going on in mainstream horror, just from the premise alone. And I wasn't giving the proper dues to, gosh, what's her name? The
Katie
chick
Sackhoff.
Who played Katie Sackhoff, who played Starbuck on...
She's so good in Oculus.
Yeah, she's really freaking good. And her character is remarkably complex. Something horrible really happens to her in that movie. But before that happens, she has these moments, just her and the camera, where it's like, I really feel for this character. Like this seems like a real person to me, and it's going through something remarkably relatable. And it actually performs a really necessary feature of grounding the movie, because the two siblings aren't the most interesting characters. They're a little bit more relatable when they're portrayed as the younger kids. But Katie Sackhoff's story is, for me, the kind of central through line that makes that movie pretty friggin' smart. For anybody who hasn't yet seen Oculus or wants, is curious about revisiting it, I'd recommend it pretty heartily. It is, the way it is balancing that sort of, timeline back and forth is, I think, pretty masterful. It's not a great film, but it's certainly a great indication of what Mike Flanagan would go on to do, which is, be at the top of his game and one of the best horror storytellers in the biz right now. Anyway, that's all I've been currently consuming. Drew, how about you? What's on your plate?
Well, I also watched a movie with a Battlestar Galactica alum in it. Mine was Grace Park, who played Boomer. I'm trying to do my 2019 catch-up, and one of the movies that I kind of knew very little to nothing about, but just saw the poster and kind of heard some reactions about that I wanted to check out is called Freaks. This is written and directed by a duo, Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein, whose other major credit, they seem to have been kind of Disney workers. They did some show on Disney. It's called, I don't know, like Mech X, and they directed the live action Kim Possible movie.
I didn't know that was a thing, but okay.
I didn't either until I watched this Freaks movie.
I did, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, Freaks is not a Disney movie. It's an R-rated, what we would call back in the day a kind of dark sci-fi tale, but I called it one of the best X-Men movies ever. It's just not called X-Men. It's a movie I don't want to, I mean, even that is kind of a little telling about what it is, but basically the movie kicks off about a father and daughter who are holed up in a house and seem to be hiding, and the father will not let his daughter go outside because he says if she does, she'll be killed. And we don't exactly know why or what's going on. There's an creepy ice cream truck that's always seems to be outside the house that's driven by Bruce Dern.
And his name is Mr. Snowcone on IMDb. I just looked this up, and it's delightful.
And the movie's really good at unwrapping its mystery of what's going on. I recommend, I never saw a trailer or anything, so I went in very, very blind, which I recommend. It definitely helped in my experience with the movie, but even by me saying it's a good X-Men movie, I think you can get a hint at what's going on. There are people with abilities, and this feels like one of those little movies that could, because it's a very small movie, but it's doing things with the idea of, quote, superpowers or, you know, abnormal abilities that these people in this world are called abnormals.
Abby Normal.
Abby Normal.
God damn it. We all share the same brain and it hurts.
Yeah, the same Abby Normal brain.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But I was very impressed with the movie, again, how it reveals itself. Because it throws you into the middle of this situation and doesn't tell you what's going on. And you're like, okay, this is an interesting mystery. And the way it unwraps itself is very satisfying and very cool. And what it eventually builds to is, it's a very simple story, but it's so effectively well told. It's really good world building for such a small scale. And it's one of those movies where I'm like, this is what makes me happy about these kind of stories becoming mainstream, is that now people are allowed to go make these little kind of movies that they probably wouldn't have been able to get made before and be like, yeah, you know, it's superhero inspired or whatever, but this is an R-rated movie. It's a dark movie. There is some fucked up stuff that happens in this movie that kind of took me by surprise. And the movie is not moralizing in ways that I think typical mainstream movies would have to moralize. It is just a character's going to do this thing because this is what they want and they're trying to protect themselves. And maybe that's really messed up and dark, but that's what they felt like doing in this moment. I highly recommend it to anybody. Like, I think I said to you, Travis, I'm like, this is the movie that's kind of scratching the itch that I've had for the New Mutants. Like,
oh, now I'm sold.
Yeah, where I'm like, oh, this is kind of a darker horror take on this kind of a story. So I very much recommended it. It came kind of out of nowhere for me, and I like it when I can just kind of go off pure buzz for a movie. I'm like, I haven't seen anything from it, but it's in genre and people are saying some of the right things about it. I'm just going to dive in, and this was a rewarding one. So I highly recommend Freaks. I don't know if it'll make my top 15 of the year, but it's definitely one of my favorite movies of the year.
All right.
Thank you, Dani, for stopping by. And if y'all want to listen to some more of our chat with Dani, go check out that Patreon episode. So thanks again for stopping by, Dani.
Thank you for having me. Anywhere I can talk about the things I'm obsessing over.
You always got a platform for that here.
Don't tell me that. Bye.
Bye.
All right, let's wrap things up with our
Comment of the week.
And oh boy, I know we say this, and I don't want it to sound like just a rote thing that we say every week. I love when you guys come out in the comments, especially for movies that I don't expect to get a lot of play, and people commented about 2010.
People had shit to say.
I was so happy. Like, you guys, you rock so much. So much so that I wish I could feature everybody's responses. But of course, you guys are leaving really thoughtful, descriptive comments, which I'm sure this is the only place on the internet where that's happening. So thank you. But the one that got me thinking the most is from JT, who said, one thing I thought about the ending, and this is coming from a pretty strict agnostic bordering on atheist, is that Europa sort of becomes the tree of knowledge of good and evil from the Garden of Eden. Parentheses, look at all these new wonders I made for you, but don't go to this one place, okay? Which would, by extension, make the monolith and its creators essentially what is interpreted as God by the beings who evolved upon its discovery. Which probably also means that whatever peace on Earth is the result of the Jupiter event will inevitably be short-lived, because mankind will make the same mistakes again. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Shrug. No, you're not, JT. That is a fantastic extrapolation of that ending.
It's a good take, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I did not think about that at all, but I think it's the movie ends very hopefully, and I think it ends with this is the chance to start again, and that's where the interpretation of the ending, it's one of those like, it's the lady or the tiger type thing.
Sure, but because it presents this barrier, it says you can't do this. To humans who, by and large, are really great at breaking down barriers. One of the most fantastic barriers we ever broke down as humans was the barrier to space travel. And we broke that down in a really surprisingly short amount of time. Will we break the barrier that allows us to go to places like Europa, even within our lifetime? I have no idea. But, the fact that it is even possible to go to places like the moon is the sort of inspiring knowledge that made Arthur C. Clarke write novels like this in the first place. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic observation, JT, and it's so good. I wish we had it in our observations, but this is what the comment section is great for.
Yeah, it's expanding the conversation, and thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who commented. Again, I when we do these kind of library titles that don't have necessarily the biggest targets on their back, I'm always like, maybe we'll get 3 or 4 comments, and great, it'll be from our loyal listeners. But you guys came to bat. Thank you so much. Next week, we'll be doing the last Genre Vision episode of the year with Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. We're closing it out. We know you're all going to be there for that. We have a cultural obligation to Star Wars. So, and we might talk about that in the episode. We'll see. Maybe we'll do something for Patreon. I don't know. Speaking of Patreon, once again, please go check out the Office Christmas party that we did with Danielle if you're a Patreon premium subscriber. If you're not, you might want to be one, because we had a really fun conversation. Again, thank you all so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.